I wanted to make a video to help you write your own stories or create your own stories. So this is our story invention writing frame, and you can see there are 5 sections to it. We've got once upon a time, one day, then, next, and finally. And the children can use these as the start of their sentences for each of these sections. Now, once upon a time is the opening to the story, and it's probably going to introduce the character. One day is going to be the build-up. So where does this character go, or what happens to them? Then, this is where the problem happens in the story. So something happens, something exciting happens. Next, and the picture is someone using their 2 fingers and sweeping to the side of them, because this is the action that we use when we're telling stories in school. So next, this is the resolution to this problem. So what do they do to solve this problem? And finally, it's the end of your story. How are you summing it all up? So what the children can do is once upon a time, and they need to choose a character. And sometimes that's easy. You could print off lots of pictures. You could flick through books. I had on my laptop, I just did a search for children's story characters. And you could choose characters that they know, like Paddington. But the problem with doing that means sometimes they can only think of the stories that they know with that character in. So you could just choose a more generic one, like a fox. You could just choose a ballerina, or you could go for a knight or a wizard or a magician. So I think in my story I'm going to go for a knight. So what I would do is I would draw a picture or write. Now I don't have to do the whole thing, because this story frame is just for retelling stories. They can learn their story so they can retell it. They don't have to write it, but they might enjoy it. So once upon a time, there was, a tricky word that I know, a knight. Now, if the children are spelling this, remember they probably won't know that there's a silent K on the beginning, but that's okay. We know the "ite" called k or, and they may use the wrong sound here. I'm going to do it correctly just for this. There was a knight called, and I'm going to give him a name, and my knight is going to be called Bob. And you can use these sections to reinforce sentence structure, that there needs to be a full stop at the end. So I can learn that now. Once upon a time, there was a knight called Bob. And then we need to decide what's going to happen. One day, he went for a ride. Now, the children might spell it like that, and you'd say that's great spelling. It's not a problem because they've used their phonics that they know. So he went for a ride on his horse. Horse. Full stop. Then, this is the problem, something exciting. And obviously if it's a knight, it's going to be a dragon. Then he saw, now I know how to spell that one, but maybe your children don't, so they'll use their phonics. He saw a dragon. Next, Bob, I'm going to ask him to, I'm going to ask them to use Bob, just because it mixes up the story structure rather than he all the time. But so, once upon a time, there was a knight called Bob. One day he went for a ride on his horse. Then he saw a dragon. Next, Bob made friends with the dragon. Finally, they. And in fact, if that's the start of my sentence, this doesn't need to be a capital letter. It's not a problem if your children are a little bit confused about capital letters. You can reinforce it when you're reading stories or when you're rewriting it. Finally, they went back to the castle for tea. Now, I've written my story, but as I said, you might draw pictures, you might print your pictures from the internet. Your child might tell you the story and you might write it, and then they use this to learn their story. Once upon a time, there was a knight called Bob. One day, he went for a ride on his horse. Then he saw a dragon. Next, Bob made friends with the dragon. Finally, they went back to the castle for tea. Now, the reason why we learn them, you can add actions to it as well. The children can add actions so that it helps them remember, is because then when they are writing more stories, they can remember the structure for writing a story from scratch. And they can remember stories that they've already invented that they can use parts of again and again. What we've done at school before is we've had little pots, one for each of the sections, and in the Once Upon a Time pot we've had characters that they can just pull a picture out of, and then that randomly gives them their character. We've had pots with where they might go for their build-up. So, you know, it might be the shops or it might be a castle. And of course, the thing about that is it creates some very random stories because you just don't quite know where it's going to go. Some of these bits they do need to invent themselves. So, like the resolution is probably going to need to be made from scratch. You probably can't use a picture to invent that, and you need to talk about that. And that's a good thing because the point of this is to learn about stories, and talking about how to solve, how to come to a resolution is really important. And the more complex the stories get, the more important it is that children understand the structures and lots of different ways to create stories. Because otherwise they become a bit samey. So once you've created your story and your child knows it, they can retell it, you could video it, you could make it into a zigzag foldy book and draw pictures for each section. You could write it out like I've done. Your child can write it out on this story frame if they'd like to, or they can write it out themselves in a book or on some paper. And then just have fun. You can do lots of them, and you can invent as many stories as you like. Have fun. Bye.